Hello everyone and welcome to the 2019 Isle of Man Open Tournament. This is the first time that the players are not competing only for ratings, money and prestige, but also this time he who wins the tournament gets a spot in the FIDE Candidates Tournament 2020. So it's really strange but also very nice. If you've caught the interview with FIDE President Arkady Dvorkovich, he mentioned that he and probably someone who decides on these matters in FIDE, decided that the tournament was very well organized and that the attendance is a lot of very strong grandmasters. So they have decided to grant the winner of this tournament the spot in the candidates tournament, and also he who wins the second place will get to be considered maybe as a wild card, along with someone who won third place in the World Cup, and along with someone who won third place, I believe, in the Grand Prix. So that being said, 154 players will be competing for this spot in the candidates tournament. The prize fund is $432,000, and first place is $70,000. So the players get 100 minutes for the game for the first 40 moves. Then they are awarded additional 50 minutes, and there is a 30 seconds increment starting from move 1 as usual. So without further ado, let's check it out. I don't have a fresh photo of Magnus. He shaved his beard, so if I get one, I will use it, but up until then we are going to have to use this one. So with the white pieces, Carlsen opens with d4. We have knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, and we have d5. The queen's gambit declined is on the board. We have knight to c3 and now knight b to d7. Carlsen trades once in the center. We have c captures, e captures, and bishop to g5. And here c6, strengthening the center. Carlsen's opponent is Yuriy Kuzubov, a very strong Ukrainian grandmaster. He's 29 years old at the moment. He became famous, not famous, but well known to the world some 15 years ago in 2004 when he defeated Sergei Karyakin with the black pieces. But okay, queen to c2 by Carlsen with h6, pushing back the bishop, bishop to h4, and now even g5. With bishop to g3 and knight to h5, gonna go for that bishop pair right away. With queenside castle by Carlsen, and now knight captures on g3. With h captures on g3, and now knight to b6. So Kuzubov won Carlsen's bishop pair. Carlsen no longer has a dark square bishop, but he wasted a lot of moves on doing that. h6, g5, wasted a lot of moves with his knight, which is no longer on the board. Now he plays knight to b6, and he wants to get a very nice outpost for his knight on c4, or if Carlsen wants, he might want to play b3 at some point, but that's weakening the queen side a bit too much. You're going to be very weak on the dark squares. So e4 by Carlsen, and now bishop to e6. Again, just strengthening here. And Kuzubov already had his position on the board during the 2019 Hungarian Team Championship, which means Carlsen prepared for this game very well. And in that game, Kuzubov played this game against Gabor Nagy, where knight to e5 was played. Also, e captures on d5 is a known move, but Carlsen plays bishop to d3. It's a new move in the position, and as of move 13, we have a completely new game. And as soon as Carlsen played it, Kuzubov replied with queen to f6, saying that this does not surprise him. And here Carlsen spent a fair amount of time, I believe some 15 minutes, deciding on what to do next. It's hard to say, but maybe he forgot his preparation, as queen to f6 is the engine stop recommended reply to bishop to d3. But either way, maybe he was just double checking for some ideas. But in the end, he pushed e5. He decided to close the position. You could also try and trade everything. E captures, knight captures, bishop captures, and rook h e1, claiming that you are better here. For example, after bishop to e7, you can go queen to e2 and now not allow black to castle, as you would just lose the bishop here. But then bishop captures on a2, and we get this really crazy position where black's king is stuck in the center of the board, but white's king doesn't really have all that many squares either, and it's going to be, well, it's just going to be a very active game. So Carlsen prefers to keep everything solid. He pushes e5, pushes the black queen back, queen to g7, and now knight to h2. Preparing to push the pawn all the way to f4, and the black prevents this by playing g4, pretty much blissing it out. Now f4 will be met with g captures on f3 en passant, which is a possible line, but you have to sacrifice the g3 pawn, which again creates a lot of crazy ideas. For example, if f4 captures on f3 en passant, g captures and queen captures on g3. It's a very bold pawn sacrifice. For example, now knight to e2, and after the queen moves, now you push f4, and the white's position is very solid here, but still, if you don't... it's hard, if it's not in your preparation, it's hard to decide for something like this over the board. f5 is coming, but still, black will get a very nice outpost for his knight on c4, and it's a trade-off. So Carlsen prepares it. Instead of pushing f4 right away, he plays knight to e2, which signifies that maybe he wants to go for f4 now that the knight guards the g3 pawn, but also maybe he's looking at knight f4 to maybe h5 to f6, also a very nice outpost for the knight. Either way, Kuzubov replied with castling queenside, and now Carlsen goes knight to f4 instead of this idea. And now he could have some ideas of going knight to h5 to f6, or maybe just snapping the bishop on e6 with queen to g5, pinning the knight as the king is still on c1, and now king to b1 by Carlsen. You also could try knight to f1 here with the idea of just going rook to h5, but then black can play h5. And now white has a lot of interesting ideas. For example, bishop to h7, preventing the rook from defending the h5 pawn. Now the threat is rook captures here, but still there are a lot of options for black too. Something like bishop to h6 now puts pressure on the knight here. h4 will be a threat, and it's really just a crazy position. So after queen to g5, we have king to b1 by Carlsen first, not allowing this pin to exist, and now h5 by Kuzubov, not allowing the rook to ever reach the h5 square. And now knight to f1. Here Carlsen has a lot of interesting ideas, like knight to e3 to f5, just putting a knight to f5, where black will have to decide whether to give up this bishop or not. Also, just knight e3, maybe a rook to h4, get this rook over to h1 and win the h5 pawn, if black can even defend it. So black goes rook to h6. Putting more defense here, but also preparing to maybe develop the bishop and get this rook into the game as well. We have knight to e3 by Carlsen as prepared, and now king to b8, as there will be a trade on f5 most likely. It's a nice prophylactic move, just getting the king out of the way. And here we have knight to f5 by Carlsen, but it's a really tricky position. For example, if you go for the idea that we mentioned, rook h4, preparing rook to h1 to win the h5 pawn, black gets a lot of interesting counterplay with c5, and it's just a disgustingly crazy engine line, so I'm just going to show it, because after c5 you get d captures on c5, and now rook c8, preparing to recapture the pawn here. Rook to h1, now preparing to win the h5 pawn, and now d4, attacking the knight. Knight to f5, now you get rook captures on c5, attacking the queen, and now you can go for this queen captures on c5 idea. I said it was a disgusting engine line, so I hope you were ready for it. Bishop captures queen, and now knight captures on h6. Queen captures on h6, and the rook captures on h5. And after the queen moves, now you go for rook to h8 check, and now you can't move the king. If you move the king, just knight captures on e6, checks the king, forks the queen, you have to capture, and now rook here wins back the queen, leaves white in a better position. So after rook to h8 check, you would have to block it, knight to c8, and now you just play rook to h5, and even though black is up in material, he has for two rooks he has a queen and a bishop, but white's position is extremely strong, and it's very hard for black to find some ideas here. But of course that's a disgusting engine line, which I only showed because it was nice. But okay, knight to f5 by Carlsen, attacking the rook, and here we have a trade. You don't really want to move the rook, something like rook h7, go under the mask of the bishop here, so why not just grab it? We have bishop captures on f5, bishop captures on f5, and then now comes h4. Now, of course, you cannot capture because the knight would hang on f4, so here knight back to e2. Just getting the knight out of the way, now you are ready to capture on h4. And here, the situation on the clock is 45 minutes for Carlsen and 21 minutes for Kuzubov. We have h captures on g3, rook captures on h6, bishop captures on h6, and then now comes knight captures on g3. So the material on the board is equal, the bishops are of opposite colors. And then now knight to c4, Kuzubov gets a beautiful outpost for his knight. So what's Carlsen's plan here? Here Carlsen goes bishop to d3. threatening to just grab the knight to win the c4 pawn. And now knight to d2 with check. With king to a1, and now comes queen to f4. Here Kuzubov is threatening to win the f2 pawn, to win the d4 pawn. It's just all very nicely placed, but Carlsen has a very nice defensive move, knight to f5. Now attacking the bishop here, so if you just capture the pawn, you will lose the bishop there, and also the d4 pawn is nicely protected. So bishop to g5, not allowing the bishop to remain a target, and now knight to d6. Carlsen creates a monster knight of his own. And here the situation on the clock is 40 minutes Carlsen and 10 minutes for Kuzubov. And here we have queen captures on f2. So Kuzubov accepts the challenge. He says, I'm grabbing your pawn, let's see what you have. Queen captures on f2, and here Carlsen spent 15 minutes calculating all of the ideas. And in the end he played queen to c3. But just to show you how poisonous the position is, there are ideas like knight captures on b7, king captures on b7, and bishop to a6 check. King captures, and now queen captures on c6 check, king to a5, and now b4 with check. King captures on b4, and now queen to c5 check. And amazingly, black can survive this attack because there's no way to get the rook into the game since, well, the b1 square is covered by the knight. So after king a4, you would have to settle for a perpetual with queen captures on a7, king would just go back, queen c5 check, and now you could just go back, king a6, queen to c6 check, king a7, queen c7 check. You cannot win anything here since the bishop is also guarding the rook, so you just have to go back, queen to c6 check, and it's a draw. Carlsen didn't like this, so there was the idea of knight captures on b7, but there's also the idea of bishop to f5, just cutting off the queen's defense of the f7 pawn, now threatening knight captures over here. And then you would see g3, knight captures on f7, and rook to f8, attacking the rook, putting pressure on the bishop here. Knight captures on g5, winning the bishop. Rook captures on f5 with an attack on the knight, and now rook captures on d2. A very sneaky move, well, there are a lot of back rank weaknesses for Magnus. Queen captures on d2. Now you cannot capture the queen because you will get mated after rook to f1. You will have to play queen captures on f5, allow queen to c1 check, block the check, and now queen captures on g5. So this is one other possibility where black has a very dangerous g3 pawn, but Magnus has a passed e pawn. So a lot of things to calculate here. Like I said, Carlsen spent a whole 15 minutes on those crazy variations, and in the end he played queen to c3. He didn't like it. He had to play a move that doesn't draw the game on the spot, as Kuzubov is a very strong Ukrainian grandmaster, but still he's 200 points lower rated than Magnus. But on the other hand, who isn't? And Carlsen, well, as long as he can keep winning chances, he will try and keep winning chances. And here we have rook to d7. It's the best move, defending f7, putting more defense to the b7 pawn. It's just an overall good move. Situation on the clock, this is move 30, 25 minutes, Carlsen 6.5 minutes, Kuzubov, and they still have to play 10 more moves to reach time control. And here Carlsen plays queen to b4. He has to keep an eye on everything, but it's hard to do that. He's keeping an eye on his d4 pawn, but Kuzubov finds a way to do it with a5. It's not good to go after the g2 pawn right away. Then you get knight captures on b7, rook captures, and now again queen to f8 check, king to c7, and now you again have black, queen d6 check, king to b6, and queen to b4 check, king c7, queen d6. But it's interesting, Kuzubov doesn't want a draw against Magnus. He feels that he's better here and he's pushing for a win with a5, now getting the queen away from the defense of the d4 pawn. With queen captures on a5 by Carlsen, there is no better move, and now queen captures on d4. And again, what do you do here? Offering a queen trade, something like this, is ill-advised. Queen captures, b captures, and now f6 puts pressure on the e5 pawn. You cannot capture as you lose the knight. So Carlsen has to go for what Kuzubov offered him. You have to capture the knight. Carlsen captures it. Now the idea is, of course, giving up the rook for 2 pieces, but there maybe is something else. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the best move for black in this position while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as I did give a hint, maybe there is something better. So congratulations for paying attention. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, queen captures on e5. This is the best move, and this gives black, well, excellent winning chances, because everything is now under attack. The rook is under attack, the knight is under attack, queen e1 is in the air. So if you don't, if you just move the rook, let's say rook d1, queen captures here happens, and then you're in a very nice endgame where you are up 2 pawns. This is great in itself, but even with best defensive moves like knight to e4, as you cannot capture it due to queen captures queen, you would still play bishop captures on d2, knight captures on d2, and now after queen to g3 going after this pawn. Yes, it's a bishop and the knight against the rook, but you are up 2 pawns, and it's very likely that you will win another pawn. So after rook captures on d2, queen captures on e5, the best move in the position, but Kuzubov very low on time. He doesn't find it. He plays bishop captures on d2 right away. We have queen captures on d2 by Carlsen. And only now queen captures on e5, but now it's a bit different because the knight escapes via the f5 square. Black is still better here, but it is a bit easier for Carlsen to play this. And here we have c5. It's the best move, just preparing to start pushing your pawns. And here situation is 20 minutes Carlsen, a minute and a half for Kuzubov. And here bishop back to b1 for Carlsen. He doesn't want the bishop to be the object of an attack when these pawns start marching forward, and he has to try create some sort of a defensive setup. With d4 by Kuzubov, of course, you have to push your pass pawn. And now queen to d3, just preventing the pawn from being pushed to c4. And now queen to d5, 15 seconds on the clock for Kuzubov. He's preparing c4. Carlsen goes queen to g3 check with king to a7, and now queen captures on g4, just grabbing that pawn, saying, okay, I just grabbed the pawn. If I grab maybe another one, then my bishop and knight are definitely worth your rook. But still, with this bishop being so weak and Carlsen's back rank being so weak, it will be very hard. And here we have d3. Maybe a bit better was c4, just keeping an option of playing d3 or c3 at some point. But okay, we have d3 by Kuzubov. As like I said, he's extremely low on the clock, few seconds on the clock, and he still has to play 2 more moves to reach time control. We have knight to e3 by Carlsen. This is the move that really brings Carlsen's defense alive, because it prevents c4. The knight and the queen are now guarding the c4 square. Also, the d1 square is covered. That's a very important square, as it is the queening square. We have queen to d4, offering a queen trade, attacking the knight. And now, well, Carlsen doesn't want to trade queens just yet. Queen to f3. Leaving queens on the board just leaves him with more opportunities. With d2, that's already an extremely dangerous pass pawn, and Carlsen blocks it with knight to d1. And here, queen to c4, just getting the queen out of the way, preparing to get the rook into the game. If he can somehow get this rook, let's say, to h1, to threaten the knight here, get the queen to c1, then he is definitely winning this game. But Carlsen also has something to say about this. Now, he can try and trade queens. Let's say queen c3, queen captures. You have to capture with the b pawn. You can't move the knight. And then after rook e7, going after the knight, you could go king b2. And now, let's say b5, you will finally get to activate your pieces and start playing this endgame. So this is one option for Magnus, but he still prefers the queens on the board. He goes queen to e3. Prevents the rook to e7, so the rook cannot infiltrate immediately. Also puts some pressure, as the c-pawn cannot move at the moment. With rook to d4, just that rook is now much better protected here, and you can finally go queen to c1. With a3 by Carlsen, creating some breathing room for the king, and now queen to c1, attacking the knight. And we have queen to b3, just defending it. Also possible for Carlsen was, if he wants to bail out, he can just play queen to e7, give up the knight, and then go again for this queen captures on c5, king a6, and queen captures here. And even though Carlsen is up a bishop, the passed d pawn is, well, more than enough compensation for the piece. But Carlsen prefers queen to b3, just setting up a nice defense. And now comes rook back to d6. Now Kuzubov wants to bring this rook over to the b file to create some threats along there. We have king to a2, unpinning. Now Carlsen wants to activate his bishop, and here we have c4. If rook to b6 right away, you have queen a4 check. So after the king moves, king b2, you're gonna play bishop to c2, and now you have this beautiful defensive setup where everything is protected. You're never getting rid of this knight here, and well, the knight just nicely guards the b2 pawn, so there are no mate threats possible here. So we have c4 by Kuzubov, and now queen back to f3. You have to keep an eye on your knight here, and now comes rook to b6. Again, putting pressure on the pawn here, and maybe preparing c3. c3, if you can play this, you should be very good, because you cannot capture with the knight due to checkmate. You cannot capture with the queen because of queen captures knight. You will have to capture with the pawn, and then white king will start feeling the draft. But bishop to f5 by Carlsen. Finally, he's able to activate his pieces, and if he can get this bishop to g4, maybe put it to f3 to use it as an attacking piece, also keep an eye on g2, and also keep an eye on the knight here, then the queen can finally be fully activated. Situation on the clock is 40 minutes Carlsen, 8 minutes for Kuzubov. So he really burned a lot of time after time control. And here, he probably should have gone for c3. We have b captures on c3, and now rook to a6, going after the a3 pawn. But here, king b3 is just a disgusting move to analyze, especially with your time on the clock ticking. For example, rook captures king c4, rook a4 check, king d3, and how do you continue this attack? Most likely, the queen will just join the action and pick up the d2 pawn, and without the d2 pawn, you're just worse. So Kuzubov doesn't like that. With 2.5 minutes left on the clock, he plays rook to b5. His idea is, I want to capture the bishop, and after the queen captures, I'll just capture your knight on d1. But Carlsen plays queen to e3 check, just remaneuvers the queen and prepares bishop to g4. So then the bishop will be guarding the knight. We have king to a6 and now bishop to g4. Here Kuzubov has 1 minute on the clock, and he has to figure out a plan how to break through. We have queen to c2. Just preparing queen to b3, as if you can get this pawn to capture on b3, then that will be excellent for black. With queen to c3 by Carlsen. Now Carlsen is confident in trading queens after 5.5 hours of play. Carlsen wants to enter the endgame. But Kuzubov now doesn't like the endgame, and he shouldn't, as here white would be better in an endgame, but it is his best chance. He tries queen to b3 check, hoping to get this queen capture, c captures on b3 check, king to b1, and now black is just completely winning because these 2 pawns create a wall against the white king. Carlsen will not be able to use his king. You're just gonna get the rook into the game, and it's gonna be very painful for white. So Carlsen, of course, doesn't do this. He just moves back, king to b1. And here, believe it or not, Kuzubov played rook to d5, but at the moment he pressed the clock, his time ran out, so here he basically flagged out. He lost on time, but even without losing on time, there is the position is now winning for Carlsen, and you can even pause the video and try to find the best continuation here, but and I encourage you to do so. So what would you play here? For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting such an elegant winning idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's actually queen to f6 check. Now that there are no threats on the queen side, you can just pick up the pawn, and that's pretty much it. For example, king a7, you can capture the pawn here, and now there are no tricks here. If c3, now to defend your rook and also threaten mate, you have queen to f2 check. And after the king moves, now you play knight captures on c3, and there are no problems here because after d1, bringing a queen into the game, knight captures, you will get rook captures with check, bishop captures, queen captures with check, king to a2, you will get queen to d5 check, and there is no perpetual because you can play b3, and the queen is covering the second rank. So here, it's 3 pawns against 1 in a queen and pawn endgame, completely winning for white. Of course, Kuzubov would have played this out if he didn't lose on time, and I'm not 100% sure if he lost on time or resigned, but I'm pretty sure he lost on time. So if anyone can, confirm that, I would be very grateful. But yeah, definitely a tough game for world champion Magnus Carlsen in round 1 of the Isle of Man Grand Swiss chess tournament. Even though his opponent is 200 rating points lower rated than him, it's never easy. Especially it's round one, you still have to get in the mood, and everyone is dangerous. There are no easy opponents, and here Carlsen definitely felt it. And Black had this beautiful opportunity here at this point. There were a lot of moves where you could have gone better, but this was just definitely that moment where rook captured. If he found the queen captures on e5, pretty sure we would have seen a 0 for Carlsen, and that he would lose his, I believe this is now 91 game winning streak, so he's coming very close to Dingliren's 100 game winning streak. We'll see if he can make it. That's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Pete McDonald for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the Isle of Man chess tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions. There are so many games being played, 154 players, so please suggest games. I can't really spot them all myself. And of course, very quickly, we will be having our vote on the next big saga. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.